Go Big 12 or go home. I'm Brandon Shanahan, joined as always by Iowa broadcasting legend Drew Russell. Drew Russell, college football's never been more back than it is at this very moment.
Oh, was it just nice, Brandon, to turn on the TV even Thursday night when we last podcast, all the way through Monday night, and just say 5 straight days of college football? Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. I mean, what elite stuff to end the summer when you have 5 days?
And it's so great. It's such a great kickoff to it because we're not going to get 5 days of elite non-conference college football, but now we also get the NFL back in action. We're going to start to get action here in a couple of weeks. So I mean, it's unbelievable. The perfect kickoff to football season.
It's the perfect kickoff to a football season. And for a lot of conferences, a lot of shockers just across the board when you look at efforts. Obviously, um, boy, I'll start with Virginia Tech. That one was weirdly a shocker to me, them losing to Vanderbilt if we're going non-Big 12 games. Um, Clemson looks lost. I thought the ACC schools had a pretty difficult, really difficult weekend. Um, no other way to put it outside of North Carolina beating Minnesota. I mean, that
And
was
actually, Drew Russell, I want to stop you there because I want to show you something.
oh no, I think I know where this is going.
So as we talked about and went over last week, every power conference I go week by week, pick every single game for every single team, and then eventually find out who now I get to standings and I go from there, and it's a lot of fun. It's my favorite thing that I do, but I do have to show you the ACC standings that I picked up because they might be the worst thing I've ever done.
Okay.
You mentioned Clemson and Virginia Tech having duds to start the week, and that's exactly who I had in the ACC championship game. I mean, this is silly.
I mean, the only team that really showed out that at least looked good was Miami, but is Florida just really bad? Is going to be the question. Miami did play very well on the road, though. I'll give them plenty of flowers. Uh, but Jiminy, it was a bad weekend for that conference. No other way
Yeah,
to put it.
definitely a bad start to the slate for the Shanahan ACC prediction. But I just want to throw that out there because I mean it might end up being one of those things where it's so bad that it's impressive.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we had this discussion on our podcast a few weeks ago of is the ACC or Big 12 going to have a better football conference this year? And on paper, you say ACC has the more power heavy teams traditionally with Florida State, Clemson, Virginia Tech's had some great teams in the past as well. Louisville's had some great teams in the past, but through 1 week, Brandon, there's no question. Big 12 looks like a much better football conference so far. Granted, a lot of the teams played maybe not heavy competition, but some of the teams did pick up good wins. And week 2 is going to be a heavy indicator, I think, of how the season's going to look for this conference as a whole.
I think so too. But just real quick, touch on a couple of non-conference things. I did want to talk about Miami because I have this working theory that you can't elevate your program to like that upper echelons of college football, like that national title contender, with a rental quarterback. If you look back on the 14 college football playoff, the only two quarterbacks who were first year transfers were Justin Fields and Jalen Hurts. And the other 38 were either homegrown or a transfer that is on their second or third year. Bo Nix, Michael Penix, Joe Burrow, all on their second or third seasons with the team. That's when they popped off. Again, Jalen Hurts at Oklahoma and Justin Fields being the exception of that. So I had kind of written Miami off in that realm. Like, I think he's a really good quarterback. I think there's just a lot of meshing that needs to do. And then I watched him on Saturday, and I'm like, boy, I mean, obviously the arm talent's always been there. That's never been the issue. But
Mhm.
how comfortable he looked. I mean, it
Yeah.
looked like he was it looked like it was a scrimmage to him, like the speed that he was moving and was just so casual about just rolling over this SEC defense on the road. It's unbelievable.
Yeah. And I think, if you're Florida, you're just praying that Miami's just a great team this year. And this was just, they just ran to a buzzsaw in week 1. But give Miami credit. They have oftentimes not shown up in these games or
Hmm.
just let the team down. Cristobal is a guy that
Yep.
potentially is on the hot seat this season, depending on how his team plays. They made a statement week 1, and the way that the ACC is forming, it's hard not to think they're not going to be a contender come late November. And the way the college football playoff works this year, You just got to win your conference you're in, and or if you're just a respectable 10, 11 win team, I'd be pretty surprised if the U was left out.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. They look good because every week I do teams who are better than I thought, teams who are worse than I thought, teams who I'm right on about. I Miami was way better than I thought they were going to be, and Florida is exactly who I thought they were. Not very good.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's an accurate analysis, Brandon, because when you look at just how everything broke down over the weekend, SEC, some of their big programs had some difficult weekends, and we'll discuss that in a little bit. I mean, LSU doesn't get it done. A&M doesn't get it done. Big Ten, I thought, actually had a very nice weekend as a whole. I'll give them a lot of credit. And I think their big victory, granted, I still view them as a Pac 12 school, but USC beating LSU was a big
That's big.
win.
Standalone
Uh,
game, and they played some good
Huge.
defense too. It wasn't just Miller Moss throwing for 700 yards in a shootout.
Yeah. Or you have, Brian Kelly just mad after the post game. Like they did their job. Like I thought they were going to get run to a buzzsaw. LSU had a great crowd. It was Vegas. That's just a LSU style place. But USC hung in there, and I think despite Lincoln Riley rightfully getting a lot of junk because he had a potential generational QB last year, and they only pick up what 7 wins. I think he kind of reminded people, hey, he's won a lot of football games in his career, and he can still coach a QB. And they, still Southern Cal, still not like they don't have
Mhm.
talent down there. So I thought Big Ten had a very good weekend. I thought Big 12, for the most part, took care of the business outside of a couple teams we'll get into. Obviously, West Virginia, hyper disappointing effort at home. The weather didn't play help at all. Once past
No.
that weather delay, they just didn't look like they had energy to be there. And the other team that was disappointing for me, they won, but Texas Tech was a hyper disappointing team to me this weekend. They really made a game that should not have been a game at all. So, but Big 12, I thought Big 10 and Big 12 both had very good weekends.
Yeah, it's and one last thing on USC. I think people are kind of sleeping on how much of a sleeping giant they are because one thing that's a- as a Nebraska fan, one thing that gets tossed around a lot is as a Nebraska fan, you think, boy, it feels like we have all this money to throw around, and they do. I think they sell. I saw a report that they have a top 10 NIL fund, but the people inside the program, the insiders talk about, well, is this roster worth spending $20 million on? And no, it's not. But then if Nebraska starts to get some wins, starts to really get the interest of some recruits, and they've gotten some buzz recently. A 5-star athlete, David Sanders, what was considering Nebraska down to his final two. Um, but the difference being like Nebraska's got a bag to give him, Tennessee's got a bag to give him, but Tennessee's won more recently. So that is, and I've also heard a lot of chatter about like USC's NIL not being up to snuff, and I think it's kind of the same territory where they don't have the production that warrants a 10, 15, $20 million roster in NIL funds, whereas like in Ohio State's, Tennessee's getting there, Miami's gotten there. So I think we're still like a 10-win USC season. I think is going to really open things up. And I think they got the dogs to do it. Miller Moss looked very good. I
Mhm.
love Miller Moss's story, by the way. I mean, it's ever
Yes.
since high school, wanting to compete, never fading away from that. He comes to USC. They bring in Jackson Dart. He's like, fine, I'll compete with them. Jackson Dart leaves. They bring in Caleb Williams, and he's like, fine, I'll compete with them. And then Malachi Nelson. They bring in this 5-star freshman. I'll compete with them. And then finally getting his shot this year.
Yeah.
I think that's really cool.
Yeah,
Big fan of
it shows perseverance, and I wouldn't have blamed him if he had transferred just to get opportunities
yeah,
elsewhere, but he wanted to find a way to make it work. He did. A win that's gotta feel great. All those years of grinding and persevering has to feel unbelievable. Talking about NIL, Brandon, I wanna give first off, and goes back to NIL eventually, ESPN Game Day, the addition Nick Saban has been a godsend. Nick Saban
unbelievable.
has
Just
been
what that show
awesome.
needed.
Oh, it's awesome. He's so good, Brandon. It's impossible not to listen to his analysis. It's detailed. It's really good. When they put him in that coach's room and they're having him breaking down film, I'm like, this is some high quality stuff. And then you see a kind of a yin yang between him and Pat McAfee, which is hilarious because I don't know if he could. Pat McAfee's energy is a little too much at times for Nick.
It's a lot
Like
for anybody.
a lot for anyone. Yeah, because But Nick Saban made a very interesting point on NIL. He just said you better pay the right guys.
That's
And
right.
he, that's an NFL style comment. Like, if you're going to go free agency or you're going to invest in guys, like, there is a limited pool money, and you better make sure these guys
Can't
hopefully
miss.
produce on the field. So that was an interesting comment to me. NIL is obviously going to continue to be a heavy emphasis on every single sport in college athletics, but for a lot of these schools, including a lot of schools in the Big 12, they have NIL funds. They might not be as big as the big boys currently, but that doesn't mean there isn't interest within each fan base. And if they see enough winning, usually NIL goes up.
Absolutely. All right, so let's talk some Big 12 here. So we'll start with the games that we couldn't pick on our pick 'em
Mm.
from last week. UCF takes care of New Hampshire um, pretty handily, but I'm seeing some buzz that KJ Jefferson didn't have a great day.
Yeah, Jefferson missed a couple throws. Brandon, a couple looked like easy touchdowns. Um, I do not care. I saw him play at Arkansas for 3 years. Brandon, this guy has every physical tool on earth. Like,
That's
this
right.
guy is a beast. He really is. When he's on, he's a top 10 QB for sure in the country. I'll say 10 for sure. Like, when he's on, he is tough to miss. But then there are days where the accuracy isn't there, the timing isn't there. He's as strong as anybody in the country. So if he can learn to hit those throws, UCF was a potential sleeper team for me when we were going through previews last week. I still am pretty high on the Knights, but he's got to make those throws, and they got to continue to develop on that defensive side of the football as well.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of promise with UCF, especially when it comes to competing in the Big 12. Because there's a Big 12 contender that I feel vastly different about that we'll talk about later. But I think you'll also appreciate this. So I had my first Friday night game on Friday, and when I was talking with the coach pregame, I was like, "Hey, what? Can you educate me a little bit on what the offense is going to look like? Like what's the scheme? What's the goal?" And he said it's a mixture of Mike Leach's air raid offense and Gus Malzahn's UCF a spread attack. I mean, that's perfect. So I got to give our guy Arthur Gustavo.
Gustavo. Yep, you never forget
Gustavo.
Gustavo, our beloved
Never forget
Gustavo.
Gustavo. So I got to give him a shout out in his full name. I'm pretty sure my color commentator was like, "Who the fuck is Arthur Gustavo Malzahn the third?" Like, oh yeah, that's right. That's right. National
Yeah,
championship winning coach.
I'm just happy you're not doing play-by-play in Arkansas, because that's a touchy name in Northwest
I can
Arkansas.
imagine.
That smells on. So Texas, who cares? But you said that in Northwest Arkansas, you might get some hate. I'll just tell you that right now.
Next one, Kansas rolled over Lindenwood. I didn't get to catch a whole lot of it, so I can't speak much about it. But Jalen Daniels' stats not what I would expect. Less than 200 passing yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. I mean they rolled by 45. So it is what it is. Fun fact on our sister show, Bookie Brook and the Boys, where we pick our best bets of the week. I had Lindenwood minus 45.5 and did not cover by half a point. So
Unbelievable.
that stung. Would have made a 4-1 week. We would have been in the dogfight, but it is what it is. The needle hasn't moved at all with me for Kansas one way or the other.
Yeah, that's just a game that they took care of their business. They got a pick six INT. Devin Neal, 9 carries over 100 yards. That kind of tells you where Lindenwood's
Mm-hmm.
defense is. But Kansas took care of their business handedly, and that's all you can ask. And they're undefeated going into week 2.
Yep. And the next one, kind of the big one that's from Thursday night, Colorado, North Dakota State. And let me just preface this by North Dakota State because they get a lot of credit for being such a powerhouse at the FCS level. This isn't that same team. They haven't been that team in a few years now. They lost 4 games last year. They're not the best team that ends in Dakota State anymore. So I think a lot of that cachet is a little bit overblown. Then we'll talk about Oklahoma State here later. But the team that is now playing at that North Dakota level and they're winning all those national championships got absolutely boat raced by Alan Bowman.
Yeah.
So I thought that was interesting. The narrative that this win was equivalent to like a quality win. Like Nope. I don't.
Yeah.
I don't buy that. Shout out the Bison. A great program, but this team is going to lose 3 or 4 or 5 games this year.
Yeah. Now, first off, Travis Hunter. Holy cow.
Yeah, that's a problem.
Like,
I
Travis
was in my
Hunter balled out.
I
Like,
was in my Husker fan group chat, and I'm like, "Is this a safe space?"
yeah.
Travis Hunter's unbelievable.
Travis Hunter,
That's a
Jimmy
problem.
Horn was big too. Jimmy Horn almost had 200 yards receiving
No
too.
kidding. He was
So,
awesome.
but the one thing that stood out to me, Colorado, their passing game is not going to be a problem this season. Brandon, they will continue to be one of the more watchable teams in college football because they built up all these offseason storylines, and it's tough not to be invested. Two things that stood out to me though. Number one, no run game at all. Like their run game was non-existent on Thursday night. They had to air it out quite a bit. Um, their leading rusher had 22 yards, Brandon. So that should tell you kind of where they're at on that standpoint. They got to find a little more balance. And defensively, they were struggling to get off the field at times. I thought North Dakota State put together some really nice drives. And man, if they had a QB that could just air it out about 5-10 more yards, they would have had a Hail Mary touchdown to end the game. Like that was a shocking catch. That was caught at the 5, but they were short of the end zone. Colorado, they were trying to intercept the ball and just swat it down. So a learning moment there for them, but they find a way to win. They set up a very fun little week 2 showdown against your Huskers, Brandon. And I mean, from your standpoint, I'd be happy Colorado won because that just adds more juice to that game.
The number one question that I was asking my fellow Husker friends was, what's what's best for Nebraska? Is it if they
Right.
win and they come in overconfident? Is it if they lose because they get exposed by an FCS team? And I think it kind of played out as best case scenario where they were very vulnerable. There's a lot of there was a lot of holes within that team that I saw, and then but they did get the win, and there's a certain level of confidence and swagger that comes with that. And they certainly celebrated like it, and credit to them, that was a good win. Uh, but my big takeaway with Colorado is the entire offseason, I was told that this is going to be a different team, that they're going to be so much better in the trenches, that their defense is going to be on another level. And it looks like the same exact team as a year ago. Defensively, they're undisciplined. They gave up 300 yards to North Dakota State, who is very limited offensively, and putting it lightly, had no run game. Sir Sanders, it seemed like he was slightly better protected than a lot of the times last year, but again, FCS defense. Um, the addition of Jimmy Horn is unbelievable,
Mm-hmm.
and that passing attack down the field is going to be a problem for anybody that they play. But
Yes.
boy, if you can just avoid playing this one specific type of football with them, I don't see how they're any different than they were a year ago.
I agree, Brandon, but it is 1 week. It'll be interesting to see if Nebraska can clean some things up from after last year's game. I think they will, and obviously we'll get to that in our pick'em coming up later on in the show. But look, Colorado is going to be continue to be entertaining. I'm going to watch. You're probably going to watch a decent chunk of their games, and it's impossible not to. It's a train that might stay on the tracks. It might go off the tracks eventually. And last year, option 2 happened halfway through the season. We'll see if they can stay on the tracks a good longer this season, or if week 2 turns out to be a potential defining moment because they win week 2, Brandon. All of a sudden, I'm thinking Colorado might have some juice going into Big 12 play and could have a pretty nice season. If Nebraska kind of takes care of their business and kind of maybe puts together a demoralizing loss to Colorado, just like Colorado did to them last season, I think that could really set a tone going forward.
Yeah, it's a huge game for. I don't know if any game this week throughout college football is more impactful to the teams playing in it, because even like Michigan and Texas, their goals are so much like their seasons are not going to be derailed in the way that the loser of the
Agreed.
Colorado Nebraska game is going to get to. But we'll get into that tier. Now we're into Friday night. Cam Rising's first game back since the Rose Bowl. Their second Rose Bowl, which they lost. He was outstanding. They absolutely crushed Southern Utah. I really have no crazy notes. Cam Rising, he's all the way back.
They took care of their business, Brandon. I think you and I both had. I think that was my highest confident pick when we made those picks last week. That had to be one of your highest, and there
Mhm.
was a reason we were so confident in that game. It was just a very I'd been shocked if it was even a close game. So Utah took care of their business week one.
And that brings us to TCU and Stanford, and I was kind of texting you about this because I did not think that Stanford was very good at all, and we talked about TCU last week and just how much I thought that they were going to improve. And they kind of laid out a bit of a stinker in the first half. But I think it's interesting because it seemed like a lot of slop. It seemed like a lot of drop passes. It seemed like a lot of just miscommunication. It seemed like a lot of week one stuff, which kind of puts me at ease a little bit because it's not like they weren't clearly the better football team than Stanford. It's just that they didn't have it all connected yet.
No, it sometimes that's the tough part about week one games where you're playing against another power, I guess, 4 conference team now that you don't know how your team's going to look to start the season. TCU
Mhm.
last year got stunned when they played Colorado week one. That was a non-conference game
That's right.
in Fort Worth, and TCU was coming off their national championship game. You and I, if I remember right, both picked TCU. Felt pretty good
Very
about it.
confident.
Felt good, and then Colorado stunned everybody to the point that Twitter was going crazy of maybe Dion knows what he's doing. And that created the kind of this crazy buzz for Colorado for 4 weeks last year. That was kind of the beginning of it. TCU, that's a bad Stanford team, not a good one. I'll say that. I'd be shocked if they're bowl eligible. No juice. The crowd was terrible as well. I can't believe what's happened to Stanford football. But uh, for TCU, Hoover I thought did enough, got it done. He had good numbers by the end of the game. They made just enough plays going forward, but not pretty. But they'll clean it up. Coach Dykes, he does a good job of making those adjustments. But they took care of their business, Brandon. It is a road victory. Let's not take that away from them. It is a road victory, and boys win at home, men win on the road. So at least they're able to take care of business early on.
I think you're absolutely right. And they pulled away late, so it turned out to be a fine outing for them. But yeah, an interesting spot for them because I thought they were going to look a lot better. But yeah, they got it done, and you're right on the road against a power conference team. So that's a good move for them. Up next, the big noon game of the week, Penn State at West Virginia. West Virginia not able to keep up. Which also, like, let me just start off with this. I think that's fine. I
Yeah.
think Penn State's really really good. I think because they get beat up by Michigan and Ohio State, they get slept on. It's like, yeah, every other team other outside of Georgia, Alabama, and Texas last year would also get beat up regularly if they had to play Michigan and Ohio State last 5 years. They haven't lost to a non-top 10 team in 975 days, Drew Russell. I looked that up today, and I love West
Wow.
Virginia. I think they're going to have a good season, but they're not a top 10 team.
No, and West Virginia, I don't know if it wasn't even they were ready to play. I think they had the energy going into the game. The crowd was great. That is what as wild as I've seen Morgantown in a long time,
Hmm.
Brandon. I thought the crowd was incredible. Weather was a disaster. I think that really took the kind of wind out of the sails. Obviously, them being down as well, they just did not have the environment they wanted to for some of that game. What stood out to me was how well Penn State executed. They ran the football well. Aller was able to do just enough through the air, and their defense was great. And Garrett Green's, I think, going to have another fine season like he did last year. But boy, if you have the right defense against him, he didn't have probably his finest stuff. He didn't turn the ball over, I don't think, or he had a fumble. But I do know that for West Virginia, you have to shake this loss off and move on. They are underdogs going into the game. You and I mean, we were pulling for the Mountaineers, a Big 12 school potentially making an impact, but Penn State, no question, the better team. Nothing wrong with that loss if you're West Virginia. How you bounce back weeks 2, 3, 4, and on, that's going to dictate your season.
Agreed. And I mean, the flip side and the sentiment that I'm getting from West Virginia fans is that they are pretty disappointed with how they played. And it seemed like every facet they just weren't good enough. And I think that they could stomach losing to a really good Penn State team, but I think it's
Yeah.
the quality of their own play that's troublesome. I mean, I don't blame them.
Yeah, I mean,
I
they
don't
had
blame
2
them.
fumbles, Brandon. They did have an interception at the very end of the game. Couldn't get off the field on third downs either. Penn State was 5 of 11. They were only 4 of 14. Time possession about the same, but Penn State, pretty much their defense was terrific. I mean, they were scoring touchdowns first half. West Virginia was scoring field goals, built that cushion, said, let's run the ball, let the defense take care of the rest. And that's usually a pretty good game plan when you're up 2 touchdowns.
Up next, we talked about this game a little bit. Oklahoma State and South Dakota State. Oklahoma State took care of business. Alan Bowman was a great field general.
Yep.
And then they fed Ollie Gordon like it was Thanksgiving. And they took care of business against the best FCS team over the last 3 years. Also, fun little sidebar. I got in a Twitter fight with somebody because I had mentioned the fact that North Dakota State isn't even the best team that ends with Dakota State. And since we went back and he was calling me a casual, I'm like, brother, I'm in a Twitter replies arguing about North Dakota and South Dakota football. What's casual about that?
Wait, was this like a North Dakota State fan or like who was
It was a Colorado fan. I was doing some chirping.
Why do they care about the state that like?
Well, because they were trying, because they were trying to beef up North Dakota State status. It's like, oh well, yeah, we lost, but it's to North Dakota State. They've won all these national championships. You know what, Drew Russell? Yale has 18 national championships.
That's true. That's a great stat.
But
those Bulldogs.
So just want to throw that out there.
Those Bulldogs were special.
They are. But I just thought that was funny because, like I've been called a lot of things on Twitter, casual while arguing South Dakota and North Dakota college football is.
That's a new one, Brandon Shanahan. You got me on that one. I go into the game though. Bowman played great. Gordon did his thing. This was a great win for Oklahoma State.
Really good win.
You and I were both. I was not feeling all-time great going into this game. They're 10-point favorites, but I thought, man, it wouldn't shock me if South Dakota State has the ball. They're down like 1 touchdown. They're tied like last 5 minutes of the game, not even remotely. Oklahoma State took care of their business. They got a really nice victory over a tough team. They take care of their business against Arkansas this week, Brandon. Like, all of a sudden, Oklahoma State, to me, is already made a statement of, we're Big 12 contenders. We can go win the championship in conference this year. Give them a lot of credit. That was not an easy opponent, and they made it pretty relatively clean day. So I tip of the cap to Coach Gundy. Defense, I thought, swarmed to the ball pretty well, got multiple sacks, really kind of put South Dakota State in some 3rd and long situations at times. So credit where it's due. I mean, the Cowboys played really well, and they keep doing that. Again, their benchmark, if they can get 10, 11 wins, they're in.
Absolutely, and I'm starting to come around. And again, Saturday against Arkansas is going to be a huge moment for them. But I'm starting to come around because I was skittish on them just because of the fact that this is a really quarterback deep conference. I don't know if you can win it with Alan Bowman, but I'm also kind of starting to come around. It's like, well, yeah, he may not be, the high ceiling like Shedeur Sanders or Noah Fafita or what Kansas State fans think of Avery Johnson, but his floor is really high. Like, he's not going to go out there and throw any stinkers.
He just has to be an average to above average quarterback most weeks, and they'll win because they do have a good team around him. They have good weapons on the outside. They have, I'll say it, I think they have the best running back in America, Ian Gordon. I think Ollie Gordon is that good, no question. So hand it off to him. As long as he does not turn the ball over, makes the throw. He did exactly what he was told to do Saturday. He had 3 touchdown passes. I think completion percentage around 70-75%. He did great. That game plan, Oklahoma sticks to that. Again, they're going to set themselves up very cleanly for November, December.
Up next, we got Cincinnati and Towson. Towson? Towson. Okay, so we got that right. So Cincinnati wins 38-20, and we talked about Cincinnati doesn't need to accomplish a whole lot this year, but they have to have something, some type of hope.
Yep.
And again, it's Towson, so like we're very early in the process, but Brendan Shoresby, 383 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, no picks. Evan Pryor, 105 yards on the ground, averaging 25 yards a carry and a touchdown. Xavier Henderson over 100 yards receiving and a touchdown. Like, that's hope. If you can get production out of that, or even 70-80% of that when it comes to Big 12 play, even if you're not winning these games, there's hope. And that's exactly what Cincinnati needs.
Yeah, there's nothing. I mean, not. I mean, Towson's not exactly an opponent you beat that you're going to go crazy over, but for Cincinnati, a needed win just to build positivity going into week 2. They didn't make it a sweat. They didn't make their fans sweat in the fourth quarter. They got the job done. And considering how their season ended last year, they just need to put together a good showing week 1 and show themselves, hey, we can be a bowl eligible team,
Hmm.
but we have to play complete football in all 3 phases. They were able to do that for the most part on Saturday. Towson got a couple of big plays in there, but for Cincinnati, take 1-0. Be happy where you're at and almost treat this season like March Madness. Just survive and advance. They're going to take some scars. They're going to take some bruises. They're not, if they finish undefeated, Brandon, you can come back to here and say I was dead wrong. They're going to take some losses throughout the season. I don't think anybody's going to deny that. But let's see, like the great Dan Campbell once said, they take a kneecap, you get right back up. Let's see how they can battle adversity. But a nice week 1 win.
For sure. Exactly what the doctor ordered for Satterfield's job efficiency. Up next, Iowa State Cyclones. Boy, they got off to such a quick start. Rocco back gets the ball, chucks it down the field into double coverage, and a great catch. And then the very next play, same kind of play right back to the end zone. So there's 38 seconds off the clock, and they're up 7-0. I thought they were going to absolutely roll. They did not. So that was the only touchdown they scored in the first quarter. Were up 14-3 in the seconds, and then added their final touchdown of the fourth. Defense was awesome, so I was happy to see that against North Dakota. But a 21-3 win against North Dakota, not exactly inspirational stuff out of them, but Rocco was very efficient, 20-26 with 2 touchdowns. Jalen Noel was a demon, 8 receptions, 135 yards. Literally half of what Rocco Beck threw was to Jalen Noel, so he was awesome. Not very dominant, but so what?
I thought they did their job, and it wasn't dominating, but Rocco Beck made some beautiful throws. I love how he threw the football on Saturday. Defense kept North Dakota out of the end zone. That's not exactly a high octane offense,
Mm.
but um, they did their job. Injuries, pretty tough for Iowa State on Saturday. They lose Bacon in the secondary, potentially for the entire season, which is a pretty big loss. Caleb Bacon. So we'll see how that plays out going forward. Defense played, I thought, well. North Dakota put together a drive in the second quarter, Brandon, that lasted almost 13 minutes, and they kicked a field goal. So that was kind of insane. But Iowa State took care of their business. It wasn't pretty at times, but they got the needed victory. Receiver play was great. Boy, I really like how the receivers looked on Saturday. Offensive line, I thought, hung in there rather nicely. They'll go into a very interesting week this week. It always is with Cyhawk week, but they've got to be feeling good. They did their job on Saturday and got a lot of years they've lost that opening game. So it's nice that they just are taking care of their business. Yeah, Brandon, I can't hear you right now. I don't know what happened. Sorry.
Oh, my apologies. Yep, I was
Sorry.
muted this entire time. It's
Yeah,
all
I
good.
was no, I was like, shoot, is it on my end? So yeah, you do say that again. Say your last part again.
That's the kind of game where, like, if you lose, it's a black mark the rest of the season. Ask Oklahoma State about South Alabama from a year ago.
Right.
Doesn't matter what you accomplish. Doesn't matter if you beat Oklahoma. That's going to be the game that people remember. So it's a big deal that they still won that game, because even though you didn't look great, also probably some vanilla stuff on offense. Um, there's still, you're not going to think about this game the rest of the season.
Right. And that's the big thing is you get the win. Just like I said with Cincinnati. Take your win and move on. And Iowa State, I thought, executed pretty well in all 3 facets of the game. Next week they're going to have to play a little more aggressive at times. Probably their defense is going to have to force a big turnover or 2. That'd be nice to see, even though that always seems to be an issue for them. Again, in the Cyhawk game, Iowa never turns it over. But for Iowa State, this team has all the potential to be an 8 to 10 win team this year. There's no question about that. But they've got to execute week in, week out. And we'll see what Matt Campbell and staff have planned up for this upcoming week.
And speaking of teams that just absolutely could not afford to stumble, that brings us to the Baylor Bears, now 1-0. They took care of business against Tarleton State. Still some concerns. 2 interceptions out of DeQuan Finn, but they took care of business. They get to take their get to take their the record to another week.
Yeah, I mean, they did what they needed to do, Brandon, and for them, very similar to Cincinnati, they took care of their business. They had a good week 1. Week 2 might not be very pretty with a much tougher opponent coming up, but did their job week 1, and for Coach Arneta, at least this week he can just kind of cruise and put together game plan. Nobody's going to be calling for his job. Even if they lose next week, probably no one's going to call for his job yet. So, just a needed win right there.
For sure. So we just talked about 3 teams who really needed a win. And now the next team needed one and did not get one. That's Houston. Really got taken to lunch by UNLV. That was a tough one, to be honest. That was a tough watch.
And I almost threw them in my disappointing teams of the weekend for the Big 12, and losing by 20 at home, not a great look. I also want to defend them a little bit, though, because Coach Fritz is working a pretty bare cupboard coming
For
in,
sure.
and it takes time to kind of rebuild, even with NIL era and all those funds. Yeah, they didn't score until 1 minute left in the game, Brandon. They almost got shut out at
Oh,
home. So that, not great. Had to bring in backup QB, I believe, at the very end of the game just to mix things up. 0 running game whatsoever. Not exactly signs you want to see from Houston. So yeah, I mean, it's disappointing. I didn't put them in my disappointing teams though, just because kind of want to give them the benefit of the doubt for a little while. But these type of performances definitely isn't going to grow confidence to the fan base. They're trying to recruit. Recruits not exactly excited to see that. And next week, Brandon, boy, you just kind of feel for them when they have to make a very difficult trip up to Oklahoma. That could be just a potential disaster, but that remains to be seen. We'll see what kind of fight they can show this upcoming week.
yeah, and it's tough because these are the kind of games that even when on a down year, like these are the games that they have to make hay while the sun's out. So I mean, looking at the rest of their schedule, Oklahoma, Rice, Cincinnati, Iowa State, and then you get into Big 12 play, they might not win a game. I mean, that Rice game is probably as close as it gets,
Yeah.
but they're in real trouble to put up a bagel here this season. But and that's tough. That's tough to see. But yeah, they're awful, unfortunately.
They're not good. There's no question about that. They are not good whatsoever. Give them time to rebuild, but again, it's not like fan base and donors are ecstatic to see that type of a loss either. I mean, if they were shut out at home, Brandon, for your first game, even I'll admit that's pretty impossible to defend. Like, you do have to put up some points usually.
And I love Willie Fritz, so I think it'll get better.
True.
I just don't know if it's this year.
Not looking good, Bob. I'll tell you that. Not looking good.
So now, one team that I'm concerned about is Kansas State because they absolutely took care of business against UT Martin, but Avery Johnson was not great. 60% completion percentage, had a touchdown and an interception. Didn't run the ball particularly well, didn't run it very often, but not very efficient. Did have one good deep ball, so that was cool. But we talk about how you have to have really good quarterback play to win this conference. Whether that's super high ceiling like Noah Fafita or super high floor like Alan Bowman. I didn't exactly see either of those out of Avery Johnson.
I did not either. I thought they took care. They did a good job. I thought their defense looked really good, Brandon. That looked like a defense that should be a top 3 defense in the Big 12. They might be number 1. That remains to be seen. But they looked very good on Saturday. Special teams look good. I thought the offense as a whole ran relatively well. And it does come down to Johnson. If he can make those throws, if he can make those plays. We talked about Oklahoma State already kind of showing themselves a potential beacon of hope. Utah, of course, we previewed them as they're going to be pretty strong this season. K-State's that other team. You were very high on Kansas State, obviously, for what they could potentially do. But it does come down to that quarterback play. Everything else, boy, everything aligns really well for that team. to have a terrific season. Everything.
That's absolutely right. TJ Giddens is going to be a problem. Even Dylan Edwards has some good plays. So you're absolutely right. If Avery John and maybe that's where I got to temper my expectations is that the team around him is so good, the coaching so good. He doesn't. And this was also the first game with their new OC. So maybe I'm being a bit harsh, but I was really excited to see him feast on UT Martin, and he just did not.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned the OC. That's something that I think that's often we forget about college sports and football. How much turnover there is, especially in this era. It seems a lot of teams are working with new coordinators every season or every 2 seasons, new quarterbacks, new personnel. So it does take time, and sometimes a game, sometimes games, or sometimes a whole season. Sometimes it just never clicks for a group. It does take time. So usually I try to give a week or two when it comes to benefit of the doubt, unless there's just a rather listless performance. They did their job, and we'll see what Johnson can do in week 2.
Yeah, I mean, also what I thought about Garrett Riley going to Clemson, I thought that was such a home run, and they scored 3 points in the first game, so maybe not, maybe
Against
not.
Florida, just remember Georgia though did play a neutral site game in Atlanta.
How does that fly?
I
How did they
You have
keep getting
no
away with
idea
that?
how much it bothers. Just call it a home game.
Yeah,
Just say you have
just play in
just say you have
Athens,
what
man.
just say you have one home game a year in Atlanta. Just admit it.
Or
That's not a neutral site game ever. I can't believe they convinced so many teams to come there. Who is the promoter? I want to meet the
yeah,
guy who convinces like USC to fly across the country to get waxed, or
yeah.
Clemson. Like that's a road game. Why would you ever agree to that?
Well, and like I'm sure there's some back and forth negotiation with it. Like, okay, well, we'll play you, but we're gonna, we'd like it to be a home and home, but if not on a neutral field. And they're just like, all right, we'll do a neutral field. How about in Georgia? All right, cool, I guess.
I
Um,
guess I don't get it.
because
I'm just gonna be honest.
and it'd be one thing if like so they play Clemson, maybe they play in Charlotte at the Panther Stadium next year. That'd be a bad college football venue. I don't know about that.
That's where they usually
There's
play the ACC championship game.
Is that right?
That is right.
Maybe not. Because I mean, if it's something where it's like, all right, well, we know how much interest this game's going to draw. We want it at a neutral, right? At like a bigger site, infrastructure and whatnot.
Right.
But then, yeah, then let Clemson have a home game in this series. But
But these
yeah,
schools agreed to it. I mean,
I
I just
guess
don't get
so.
it. I just burst out laughing though. They're like neutral site game today, and it's Georgia in Atlanta. I'm like, that's not neutral site. That's
Yeah,
a
like
home game for them. They have a lot of alumni. Last time I checked, in Atlanta. But
yeah.
what am I going to
Oh,
say? All
absolutely.
these
Yeah,
schools agreed to it. So what am I
yeah.
also going to say? I'll shut up. I'm just always burst out laughing when I hear that.
Let's see. Up next. Oh man, this one hurt. Texas Tech and Abilene Christian. Because the company I work for covers Cedar Hill High School, and that's where Joey McGuire was for like 20 years before he got into the college game. Eventually, now the head coach. And boy, the way that they talk about their experience with Joey McGuire. I mean, this guy's such a good dude, such a good football guy, and boy, he gets me every single year.
I don't know. Texas Tech, boy, you and I just always are all in on Texas Tech. Like we love Texas Tech,
Hmm.
and then they almost just want to make us look stupid every single week. And I mean, I was not. That was to me the most disappointing performance of the weekend, and I know they won. But man, Brandon, this team is better than this. They should not have been in that position. Abilene Christian's given some teams some troubles last few years, but it should not have gone to OT. I thought they were going to learn from last year to take care of their business. Um, but defense was terrible. I mean, I'm just looking at these numbers right now. You give up 51 points. They gave up 506 passing yards.
Unbelievable.
I mean,
And that's a
506.
and you hinted at it right there, which is the problem is that this is a regular occurrence because we talked about how important that Oklahoma State South Dakota State game was for them because of their blowout loss to South Alabama last year. With this game was so important for Texas Tech because of their loss to Wyoming last year, because of their struggle to win games that they're supposed to win. And this is another example of that. And I'm like, oh, here we go again. And yeah, they won. And we just spent 20 minutes talking about how, well, it so much more important that you get that win than that loss, and that's true. But it is becoming a pattern, and that's the problem.
Yeah, and I'm curious how practices go in Lubbock this week because yes, they won, but boy, I'm sure the effort, the energy, the defense giving up 51, and the offense played great. I mean, you know, Boyd was terrific, running back position. I mean, their offense was not the problem on Saturday, Brandon. Boy, that
No,
defense, if they're giving up that, Big 12, I mean, this is old school Texas Tech. This is air
yeah,
raid Texas Tech, where they're just going to try to outscore you. And it did work, I guess, on Saturday, but that's a disappointing performance considering I think what they can provide on the field. But they did win, yes, but the
it
way
does
they
feel
won
different.
was not inspiring.
Yeah,
But they did win,
they did win, but
so
yeah,
no
it
one's going to take that away from them.
does feel very different than some of the other Big 12 teams who maybe had to grind one out. But
Yeah,
who didn't have to grind their game out? BYU 41-13 in their first game against Southern Illinois. Top 10 FCS team. They took care of business. Good on them. Happy for them.
yep, they did exactly what they needed to do, Brandon, and just, I mean, I'm to the point, we've got all these games this week. Big 12 did their job for the most part.
Yeah.
Seriously, I mean, they really did in terms of winning their games this week, not having any. Houston's the only loss you just kind of heavily scratch your head, but nobody else had a heavy head scratching loss overall. So you have to be happy about that.
And then these final two games, they've been my favorite. They're I think the most exciting part of this weekend's because first of all, they're two new additions. Second of all, these happen at like midnight my time, so we're getting Big 12 after dark. This is phenomenal stuff. First one, Arizona and New Mexico. I'm skittish on Arizona because I know they got Ted McMillan and I know they got Noah Fafita. I'm like, can that duo really carry this team to a conference yet? I think they can. I mean, they were unbelievable. 300 receiving yards for McMillan. Unbelievable stuff. That was awesome.
Pretty amazing when you look at just that team's capability. Arizona's fun.
They're a lot of fun.
They're so fun. They've got the crowd was awesome Saturday night too. I love the energy that they had in Tucson. I know they've struggled to get attendance in a lot of years, so it's fun to see that stadium pretty much full. And how about the wide receiver play, Brandon? Like, are you kidding me? Big
Unbelievable.
Big 12 records.
First
Like
game in the conference. Unbelievable.
first game in the conference. Say, well, I'm just going to go put up 300 plus.
Well, Drew Russell, that's what you expect from the team who has the most Big 12 championships in history.
Yeah, what was I thinking? Yeah, I mean, what was I should have been thinking right there. I don't know. And their defense wasn't great. I think there is some things to work there, but New Mexico's not a bad program. They've seen some decent seasons, but that offense, Brandon, that's
Unreal.
must watch. That's must watch TV every single week. Put them on the late night game every week. I will
Yeah,
watch. That's
absolutely.
like guaranteed. If you want to be Big 12, you're like, hey, we don't want like all-time great football, but we just want some entertainment. Put on Arizona or Colorado every week. I will watch. Guaranteed. That's the easiest sell of all time for me.
And then I know we had some bigger spreads throughout the evening, but this I think was the most dominant win in the Big 12, and that's Arizona State and Wyoming.
Mm-hmm.
FBS level team in Wyoming in the Mountain West, a team who beat Texas Tech a year ago
Yep.
and just got absolutely waxed by Dillingham's boys. And I felt like a crazy person for being like, I believe in what Dillingham's doing. I like the vision. I think they're going to be middle of the road in the Big 12 this year. And it feels so affirming from what I saw. Sam Levitt was very efficient. The Michigan State transfer, their defense was awesome. My heart broke when Wyoming got a touchdown with 2 seconds left in the fourth quarter. But I mean, 118 total yards allowed,
Yeah.
2.3 yards per play. I mean, this defense was playing with their hats on fire.
I'd say outside of Oklahoma State, because I really was impressed with their win this weekend. I thought Arizona State had the second best weekend in the conference, and probably their fan base could talk me into number one. I thought they played obviously great. If you take a look at from a baseball pitching standpoint, that's a complete game. I'd say shutout, maybe one earned run, but they dominated. I mean, they just bulldozed a team that you mentioned, Brandon, pretty solid last year. Not a bad Cowboy team whatsoever. They had some guys coming back too. And Arizona State, there were some question marks, a few coming into the season, and they took care of their business. Kudos to Arizona State. They played great football in week 1.
I did just have the very sad thought that Kenny Dillingham might be so good, he might also be the head football coach at Florida next year. So that's a problem. I don't like to think about that. That makes me sad. But holy smokes,
Why would you want that job, though? Honestly, outside of money. I guess money's money.
Money, yeah,
and resources.
that is the answer.
But
and that's the thing is that's not just money for Kenny, but now Kenny's gets to pick $1 million assistant coaches.
Do you know what Napier's buyout is at Florida?
$25
million. And they're going to pay it. They're going to pay it. I guarantee it.
Yeah. I think
$25 million. Those college football agents, if you're a college football agent for a football coach, you have the best job on earth. You make so much money.
Yeah.
Because these schools have no choice but to pay.
Yeah.
They're
and even when you don't, even when things go well, like James Franklin's contract, that's worked out well. But getting a chunk of that, I mean, that kind of security.
It's funny when they play bad, they just have no raises. But if they play even mediocrely well, they'll bump the coach's salary. And if they play great or beyond expectations, then they'll bump it to a rate you're like, that's absurd just because they're well, we heard rumors that there might be a school interested.
Yeah. Like Dan Lanning agent, he got paid last year just from, you know.
Saban retiring made a lot of people money.
That's right. That's
seriously. That made it just a lot of people money. Sarkisian, he was just like, hey, Texas, I know you got the Chambers. I'm thinking about Alabama. Well, here's more money.
Yeah.
You have Arch Manning. Just here you go. Push that in. So shout out to Arch Manning too. First touchdown pass of his career. Cool. Nice to see the young Manning. America loves the Mannings. They love the Mannings, Brandon Shanahan. It's a love affair between the Mannings and football in America.
That's right. That's right.